So what does this all mean? Well, for food-based learning activities in this way, and a number of studies, I think Terrence Swindle's on this call, WISE has seen something similar, where that we have seen either consistency or even increases in skin carotenoids occur when food-based happens in the classroom. What I was most interested in terms of the discussion for today was that compared to other tools that we typically use in these types of situations, it seems that the Veggie meter might be a more sensitive measure in short term. So when we think about liking as something that's common, willingness to try, liking preferences, these come up in the literature for preschool age children quite frequently. Liking takes a significant amount of time to change. If it's a new food, we're talking 8 to 12 exposures. If it's a familiar food, we're not really sure yet in the literature how much time it takes, because a preference is already established. So you might have a bigger uphill to climb. What's actually expected potentially is a slight decline as children are initially exposed. And then the idea is that it would tick back up, but we don't know how long that's going to take. So with the Veggie meter being paired with some of these assessments, you might be able to detect changes in their diet before you actually detect a change in something like a preference or a liking. So that could potentially be really helpful to our field moving forward, especially if we can validate this thing in young populations. So not validated yet. That's something that we need to work on. Again, the adult studies are really promising. So this study is outlined and published in the JNEB article that came out last year. These slides will be shared so you can find that citation. But I also wanted to point out one other study that utilized some of this data that looked at the data points we had with regards to over time, age, and sex. We did exclude the intervention group because they were different, but we found that over time, skin carotenoids were dropping in Head Start children. Older children did have higher scores, and males had higher scores. Now, our sample was primarily African-American with a little bit, a few children that were white and Hispanic, so we didn't have enough diversity in that to assess any differences in race and ethnicity, but that would be a good research question moving forward. What does that look like in children and by geographic area? There's some indication in the literature that there may be differences in those variables as well. Again, I'm going back. Why do I keep going backwards? And moving forward, I did want to point out, Rachel mentioned the possibility of a preschool working group. There actually is a preschool working group already. A few of us kind of working on some of these issues, and moving forward, we're actually in the process of writing a systematic review that's looking at data with children 0 to 10. I feel like, and Rachel can inform this, there's someone that's working on toddlers and infants or infants. And this says 0 to 10, it should be 1 to 10 because someone else is doing a paper on infants, and Rachel can talk about that. We also have a colleague that is doing an inter-device reliability assessment. This is with adults, not children, but looking at the feasibility of being able to compare two devices and the data it collects. And that has implications for whether or not we have the ability to switch devices up when you're in the field, or if you've got to track your device with each person that you're collecting the data, which is what's recommended, but we don't have any data to back that up. And then finally, we got to validate this thing in kids and adolescents. Once we're able to do that, I think it's really going to open up a ton of doors and change how we assess dietary intake in children. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for sharing. I'll just share some of the chat that came about while you were speaking. So Alicia wanted to compliment that it was a great point to build familiarity with the kids and the families, because it can be intimidating to even the older children that we've worked with as well. So I can imagine with toddlers, it's a whole different situation. Nancy Moran is the one who is working with infants, and I don't think she's on the call today, but then Lou also indicates that he is working with infants as well. Jesse, your comment about two Veggie meters giving very different scores. Okay, we have that as one of our discussion topics for today. So let's have a big conversation about that. I'd like to open it up to anyone else who'd like to unmute and ask Virginia questions.
I do have a question, Virginia. Did you use the finger cradle for the skin carotenoid scores in the children?
Yeah, this is a little controversial. I have requested said finger cradle and have been told numerous times that it's not needed. We have not had issues with really needing the finger cradle for our preschoolers, but I have noticed because a lot of our Head Starts are now opening early Head Start programs, and our administrators actually like seeing this data. Over time, we've been collecting it in a number of our centers just as part of our health measurements for them to show them a different assessment, because they're typically in Head Starts doing a lot of height and weight, but that doesn't say anything about diet of the children. So what I've noticed though is there's no way we're going to be able to do the early Head Start, 0 to older 2. Their finger is way too small, but I have not been successful at getting a cradle. We're supposed to be able to request one, but I have not. If anyone has tips on how to get one of those. But with that being said, I have not had any issues with our preschoolers' fingers being too small, or because we were really worried they were going to get smushed, where they're so teeny tiny that it, smushes it, because that pressure can be pretty heavy if your finger's too small.
I don't have experience with this, but I'm wondering I thought I saw someone from San Francisco Department of Public Health on the forum today. If anyone there could speak to this, because I know you also work with preschools and Head Start centers, if you have any insight here.
Oh, so Lewis was able to get one. If you have any tips on what you asked, because I requested this because we didn't need it for our older kids maybe 6 months ago when we were writing the protocol paper, is when because I think Lewis was the one to tell me about it. Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. I phoned him and he sent it.
I'm going to try again. Because I can't do anything with our early Head Start kids until I have it. It's just, yeah.
By cradle, you're talking about that piece that you can switch when you put the finger in?
Yeah, it should just slip in to the device.
Yeah, no, we had we have them, so we use them. And the only other thing I can say is that it is very intimidating for kids to the whole notion. What I like to always do before I ask an array of kids to do is get a very courageous volunteer to do it. And through the years, I learned to get them excited about the rainbow. So I just want to see what your rainbow score is. And that has been helpful.
Yeah, we do something very similar. So that's good to hear that you say that. Thank you for that comment. That's one of the reasons why we absolutely take it to the enrollment fairs. It's a very sort of low stakes. They're really just there filling out paperwork to make sure their child can get enrolled for the next school year. And you could probably do something very similar in another preschool setting, like a health fair, where it's just a device that we're talking to families about and let them try it out. In that way, you're right. I mean, the comfort level just explodes. And then when they get their score, it's just, they're very excited. It doesn't even matter what it is. And then it becomes a little competitive, but because we're not collecting data at that moment, like all those conversations are just fun. And so then when we communicate again with them, it's like, oh yeah, we know what that thing is. And they just sign, it's not a big deal. In terms of there was something else that you had said too, about children and their fear. We've seen a lot of that. And you're right. If you can get a brave person to step in front, the mom, the dad, somebody, it helps a lot. It's just very intimidating to stick your finger in a dark hole when you're probably any age, but they're used to shots and everything else. You gotta think with well-check visits, like a shot every time. It's like, is this gonna prick? Is it gonna hurt? Yeah, poor baby.
We had to learn the hard way not to use the word doctor around kids.
Oh no, yeah.
So they do get measured. That we take their height and their weight as well. So they're familiar with scales. And when they go to clinic, they go to the doctors, they do get measured. So I just introduced the Veggie meter as just another tool to figure out how many vegetables, how many carrots they ate last week or last night, or just try to use common language, try to use words that you want. And you're right, it can be intimidating to put put your finger. And I do get that where the child is just like, you know what, I'm not doing that. Everybody else can do it. Everybody else can get their sticker, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm not the one.
They're not doing it. Yeah. And Taryn and Anna have made some comments too, very similar. Taryn commented on her sort of rate of refusal. Ours is probably similar. We actually, when we go, have very few that actually refuse because they've been able to, you know, practice with it. And so they know it's not going to hurt them. Yeah, it's an interesting, and the color dynamic, that was the other thing that you commented on, is a really nice piece too, to highlight. We had, Stephanie, I don't know if you remember this conversation, at one point we had even talked about like equating colors with different things and had decided against having too much focus on that because we didn't want there to be some sort of, like if the color was associated with a superhero or something. Mm-hmm. We didn't want them to like be upset when they got blue and it was not their superhero. But what color do you think you're going to get, you know, instead of setting it up in a way that they might be disappointed? Not that that affects the data or anything, but we don't want to have an interaction with the child that ends poorly. But yeah, I don't know if you remember that. We had a student was suggesting that. So Emric is asking, is there differences based on how much pressure is placed on the finger? And if so, can there be a way to measure this? Stephanie might have some insight into that. That is one of the reasons with the cradle, I've always wondered, has anyone assessed, like when you put the cradle in there and it changes the dynamic of, has anyone assessed the differences between with and without the cradle? With the smaller fingers potentially having greater pressure, have you seen anything about that, Stephanie? There's so little work right now in children and adolescents. This is probably a question that needs to be asked.
I do wonder about that though. We did a small little study, Nancy Moran, her lab, because not with the Veggie meter, but with the spectrophotometer. I can never say that word, the Konica Minolta, because it's a device that you kind of hold up like this and you put it on the skin. But it has a little, it's similar. It has a little bulb, and you press a button and it assesses the melanin that way. So either you can take the device and place it down on the skin, or you can hold the device up and have the person put their finger on the device. And so she did a little study to see how we could get higher or lower interperson variation. And we found that putting the finger on top was the best. So, I mean, I don't know if that translates to the Veggie meter, but
yeah.
And also I think that lever that lowers down on the finger is probably supposed to standardize some level of pressure. But it's a good question, and I don't know the answer.
I guess the question would be, especially when you're dealing with 5 and, well, no, I guess children and adolescents, because they're growing and the size of their hand and fingers is going to change and graduate. Where, you know, usually it's 4s and 5s that are greater in our samples, and we do have to move on for time in a second, but their fingers are generally pretty similar. But if we start expanding and doing like 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5, you're going to have such a large variation in the size of that finger. So a validation study, oh my, it's going to have to address some of that, right? There's one that we need to make some notes for. That's going to have to be a large grant with a lot of people on it trying to address all this stuff. And Alicia has a comment there for you, Emric. Werner told me that the new skin device is the precursor. He claims this version of the Veggie meter is significantly more sensitive than earlier versions.
Yeah, we similarly from Werner had heard that like the new skin, he hadn't designed it with research explicitly in mind, whereas the Veggie meter was. I think that was one of the things, but